Hello, so we are now going to begin our ecology unit. And I wanted to start by saying ecology is a really difficult discipline because it's built on all the other biological disciplines and it tries to maintain a holistic picture. And in doing so, you need to understand a lot about all the levels of biology beneath it. So let's get started. Ecology is the study of the relationship between organisms and their environment. It comes from the Greek word oikos, which means house, and logi for word, or it's the word of the house or the study of the house, and that is the house that animals and humans live in other words, the earth. And I want to start this talk by showing you a series of pictures. So take a look at this and see what you see. I'll give you a few seconds to look at that. And I'm going to move on and show you this. And I'm asking, can you see the similarities? Can you see similarities between these? And here's another one. Can you see the differences? Can you see the similarities and differences between these three? So what were we looking at here? Well, in each case, we were looking at a forest, and we all recognize that similarity. But did you know that they are all oak forests, right? In other words, the dominant tree in these forests is in the same genus of plant, Quercus, the genus of oaks. And the first was in DC, so let's go back and look at that. And the second was in Scotland, so let's look at that. And the third was in China. So ecologists try to account for both the similarities and the differences in places like oak forests. And in the same way, if we look around the world, we notice similarities in many kinds of ecosystems. So just as the forests were similar, so we can find similarities between all grasslands all over the world, between deserts all over the world. For example, all deserts have plants that are adapted to conserve water, and we can look at how that's come about. The rainforests on the 5 different continents that have them have similar structure from the ground to the canopy, but in each case they have different species. And the roles played by organisms in similar ecosystems are often similar, even though the species are different and in fact unrelated to each other. So it is these kinds of observations that have caused ecologists to say there must be something underlying it. Let's move on and think about when you look at any of these places, you find organisms interacting with each other. They do not lead independent lives. They're not just all thrown in together. Their lives are connected to each other. Some eat each other. Some compete with each other. Some provide habitat for others. Some change the physical space. Some capture energy from inanimate sources, etc., etc., etc. And these organisms all are interacting. And these systems have existed for incredibly long periods of time, since well before the advent of human beings 150,000 or 300,000 years ago. And the organisms have thus evolved in response to each other and to each other's presence. And so these are co-evolved groups of organisms living together. As a result, we call these assemblages of species that are interacting with the environment systems. Specifically, we call them ecosystems. So what does an ecologist do? Since ecosystems are assemblages of species that live in an area and coexist over time, ecologists ask questions such as, how do these systems function year after year to maintain themselves? How do they work? What occurs within the system to allow it to function? Do they change over time? If so, how do they change over time? What are the organisms or the species within an organism? Can we group them? What are the individual species and what are they doing? What is each one doing? What happens when a species is removed from an ecosystem? What happens when a new species moves into an ecosystem? How do the ecosystems interact with the non-living environment? How do they change it? How does the non-living environment affect the living species? These are the kinds of questions that ecologists take on. And as a result, there are 2 basic approaches to ecology. One is an organismal approach, where you ask about the species that live there and what they do and how they make their quote-unquote living and how they interact with each other, etc. And you might ask about how they've evolved, how they're adapted to each other and the environment, etc. And the other approach is a systems approach, where we look at things like how much energy comes into the system, how does it get distributed over the system, where does each organism get its material resources and energy from, etc., etc. And it's this second approach that we're going to do first. We're going to use a systems approach and look for the general rules of ecology. And I'm hoping that this will give you enough ecological knowledge that you will be dangerous. No, that you will be able to look at ecosystems in a new light and start to think about them. The rules that follow, I'm just being honest here, I made them up. I've never seen them organized in quite this way, but I think they give you a pretty good picture of what ecology is and give you the intellectual tools for analyzing an ecosystem at an introductory level. And hopefully some of you will get interested and go on and study ecology in college and maybe beyond for a master's degree or a PhD. It's an amazing field. So here are the first two rules. I think that's all we'll get through today. Organisms have different roles in an ecosystem. If you think about that for a second, you probably can start to think of the different roles that they might have. Here are some of them. Okay, there are energy transducers, and you may not have ever heard that word transducer before, but it means something that changes energy from one form to another. And these organisms make living tissue from inanimate energy, and the living tissue is itself energy rich. So it takes an inanimate energy source and turns it into energy rich biological tissue. And we're going to talk more about these transducers in the next rule, so we'll come back to that. Parasites. What are parasites? They feed on the body of another organism, but they don't kill it. They're just taking a little bit of the surplus away, and that's what they do. So we can think of the insects that eat plants as parasites, not really predators. In comparison, we have predators, and they do kill what they eat. They destroy another organism in the process, and you can see humans are both parasites and predators. And then we have symbiotic organisms, organisms that work together. They have co-evolved with each other and they have a close association. So sometimes both organisms benefit. For example, the E. coli bacteria in your intestine and us, we are mutualists because we each benefit. The E. coli provides us with vitamin K and disease protection, and we provide the E. coli with food and a warm place to live and a very safe place to live. Maybe you can think of some other examples of mutualists and bring them to class. Sometimes one of the organism benefits and the other is unaffected. And this seems to be what happens with orchids growing on the branches of a rainforest tree, the so-called epiphytes that grow upon branches. These are commensalists. The orchid benefits and the tree is not affected. And perhaps you can think of other examples. We can also think of organisms that live in an ecosystem as competitors, the kind of the opposite of symbionts. The two species may have very similar roles and thus compete with each other for a resource. And one may drive the other population to zero and cause its extirpation. That word means local extinction. And so here we have a famous parasite. This is mistletoe growing on a tree. And the mistletoe sends its roots into the branch of the tree's bark, but it doesn't kill the tree. It just takes some of the tree's resources. And here's a predator. You can see this falcon has a beautiful bee eater. I think it's a European bee eater that it's about to devour. Predators interact with their prey in an interesting fashion because when the prey becomes rare, the predator has to find another food source or its population will reduce, and thus generalist predators are often more of a rule than specialist predators. And mutualists. Here's a mutualist. Here we have both organisms benefiting, the cow and the cattle egret. The egret gets food and the cow gets protection from annoying or perhaps even dangerous insects. And here is a commensalist, good old Nemo. One species benefits, the other species is unaffected. The clownfish gets protection from enemies. The anemone doesn't get much from the clownfish. Some people think that maybe the clownfish's prey, little food orts from that, get picked up by the anemone. But other people think that's not really going on. And then we have competitors. Here we see lions and hyenas that kill, and they're interacting with each other, both trying to get some of that dead water buffalo there. And with competitors, it's interesting because to be a competitor, there only needs to be a single scarce resource. The roles played by organisms allow us to do a couple of things. They allow us to make generalizations about ecosystems and therefore facilitate comparison between ecosystems. And they allow us to see similarity and differences in the structures of different ecosystems and the communities of organisms that live in them. So these roles are an important bedrock of understanding all parts of ecology, especially systems ecology. Rule number 2, all organisms need energy to survive. What is energy? Well, it's the ability to do work, and that's the physics term work. Work equals force times distance. So energy is the ability to exert forces over a distance. And how do organisms use energy? They use it to do chemistry. Chemistry is the study of the formation and destruction of chemical bonds. So organisms use their energy that they obtain to rearrange chemical bonds. They use it to destroy and create molecules, and these are the molecules that are necessary to keep a cell alive and functioning. Now, energy cannot be created or destroyed, it just changes form. So, for example, when you burn a cord of wood over the course of a winter, the energy is transformed from its chemical form to heat energy that warms you up and provides you protection from the elements. So it has to be obtained from somewhere else. And where did that wood get the energy? Well, when you're feeling the warmth of that fire, you're feeling energy that was emitted by the sun years ago, decades ago, something like that. This idea that energy can't be created or destroyed, but has to transfer from one form to another is called the first law of thermodynamics, and that's a pretty important law to remember. And we're going to see it rear its head later. And we'll also bring up the second law of thermodynamics. Here's an example of what we do as a multicellular energy. We eat this delicious food here, and it has carbohydrates, fats, proteins, things that contain energy. We digest it in our digestive tract. We absorb these energy-rich molecules, and in each of our cells, they get converted into ATP. That's the body's energy currency, and that ATP is then used to build new cells, maintain our current cells, and carry out cell function. And the result is waste products that come off, carbon dioxide and water. We breathe out the carbon dioxide, we urinate the water, and then a lot of heat that leaves our body. Processing this energy is called metabolism. Our metabolic rate is the rate at which we burn this energy. So how in general does life get energy? Well, the transducers do this amazing thing where they take an inanimate energy source and they turn it into biological energy. And some, such as these pink nodey things up here, use chemical energy found in minerals, and they use that energy to make cells. And so these are both actually these chemical or mineral-eating bacteria that are able to make biological material from just mineral energy. Some other kinds of energy transducers make cells from energy and light, and these are known as photosynthesizers. And currently they are the most important form of producer on Earth. All other organisms get their energy by eating another organism. So we can group life into two categories now based on this simple fact. The producers that transduce inanimate energy into an animate source, and then the consumers that have to eat a living organism. And you can take a guess what we are. In scientific terms, we call the transducers autotrophs, they feed themselves, versus heterotrophs, which feed on others. And within the autotrophs, we have two types, the chemoautotrophs, they're the ones that feed on minerals, and the photoautotrophs, they're the ones that feed themselves on light. The light feeding is so important that we need to pay attention to it for a second. It's called photosynthesis, and plants have this amazing molecule, and the molecule can capture the energy in sunlight. Now that is a rare thing. No animal and most bacteria can't do that. The captured energy can then be used to make the building block molecules of life, which are the basic structure of a cell. And it can also be turned into that ATP, which then provides the energy to do the transitions in a cell and allow a cell to be alive. And the building block molecules, as I said, are necessary to make the four kinds of huge macromolecules of life. And see if you can guess what those four macromolecules are. If you said proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids, give yourself a big pat on the back. So plants take carbon dioxide and water from the environment and combine them using the energy from sunlight. They make simple sugars, and those simple sugars are rich in energy. And here is the equation of photosynthesis, where we see written in three ways: carbon dioxide and water with light energy creates carbohydrates and oxygen. And here it is, CO2 plus H2O makes C6H12O6. That's glucose's formula plus O2. And here it is, the balanced chemical equation for those of you who remember your chemistry. And note that oxygen is the waste product of photosynthesis. And yes, before the Earth had photosynthesizers on it, there was little to no oxygen in the atmosphere. It's a good idea to memorize this equation exactly and conceptually because it's an important idea in understanding life on the planet. All hail photoautotrophs. We wouldn't be here without them. Now, chlorophyll deserves a special mention. Chlorophyll is the molecule that can capture the energy in sunlight. How important is this molecule? Well, it's green. If you know that it's green, you're going to realize how important it is. Look at this. We have a green flower. Guess what's occurring there? Yup, photosynthesis. Here we have green stems in this equisetum here. Guess what's happening there? Yup, photosynthesis. Look at these leafless plants, right? Photosynthesis. I think these are euphorbs, not cactus, but they could be cactus. Now that we have the photosynthesis side taken care of, and we see how organisms are able to procure energy, how do these cells get the energy in sugar? In order to extract the energy, it must be burned with oxygen. And that's called cellular respiration. And here's the equation. Glucose plus oxygen turns into carbon dioxide, water, and heat energy, which can be captured in the form of ATP in the cell. And some of you are saying, wait a second, I think I've seen this before. Well, yeah, you have. This is just the reverse of the photosynthesis equation you just saw. You should also memorize this equation because it's an important, and we'll see this equation very soon when we go through the carbon cycle in a few days. All cells do cellular respiration. They carry it out. Even if they can photosynthesize. A lot of beginning students in biology think that, oh, photosynthesis takes care of it. No, photosynthesis provides the energy storehouse, the glucose molecules. Then they must be broken down via cellular respiration to create the ATP, which is the energy currency that allows cells to do their thing. Build new cells, maintain their cells, carry out their celly jobs. So here we go. What kind of organisms can do photosynthesis? Use the most exact word you can. If you said autotrophs or photoautotrophs, that's great. What kind of organisms can do cellular respiration? If you're struggling here, just remember it's almost all. Virtually everything you know about does cellular respiration, including plants. There are a few obscure anaerobic bacteria that don't do it. Give us an example of a place where you might find an autotroph that isn't a photoautroph. Now, this is an interesting question. They're found often at hot vents under the ocean where there are these energy-rich chemicals coming out of the core of the earth, or in caves, in a lot of places where photoautotrophs haven't outcompeted them. And give an example of a place where you'd expect to find an organism that can't do cellular respiration. Well, that's in an anaerobic environment. Go down 2 feet into the mud at the bottom of a pond and you'll probably find some anaerobic organisms. And now to end today, it's time to play autotroph or heterotroph. This is a great game. You have to guess whether there's an autotroph or a heterotroph. And so here we go. Use every clue that you have. Here we have it, this little sensitive fern that you might see growing on the wall of the Washington Metro station. Yep. If you said autotroph, give yourself a pat on the back. What about the 2 organisms here, the one in the mouth and the one with the mouth? Well, if you said that the one in the mouth was an autotroph and the one with the mouth is a heterotroph, you're doing great. And here we go. Here we have 2 organisms again. What about the Venus flytrap and the wasp that it has trapped? Well, the wasp is definitely a heterotroph. But what about the Venus flytrap? If you said heterotroph, give yourself a big thumbs down. Trick question. It's green. You can see that it's green. It's photosynthesizing. It's just getting nutrients from the wasp. It's not really getting much energy from the wasp. It gets its energy from photosynthesis. And finally, what about this green chameleon? What about that? Yeah, if you said photosynthesis, big thumbs down. This is just green camouflage. There is no animal, with the exception of certain sea slugs, that are able to photosynthesize. So, that's it for today. I hope you know the first 2 rules of ecology, which are that all organisms have a role in an ecosystem And 2, all organisms need energy to survive. I hope you feel good about photosynthesis and cellular respiration and see how they're part of a giant cycle. And tomorrow we'll go on and learn a bunch more rules as we go on and study ecology. Until then, study hard and have a good time.